everybody, welcome to the Friday episode of the Donovan Bandits. I'm Orrin Phillips, and we have a phenomenal episode coming for you today. We have Steve Saffel. Steve has worked in science fiction as a writer and an editor, but his biggest thing is he worked for promotions for Marvel for many, many years. It's sort of an area of comics that we don't really talk about, but where would we be without it? The work he did got so many fans involved with the books. His ideas helped grow Marvel for years and years to come. And he's really one of the unsung heroes of the where we are today with Marvel. So, without any further ado, here's Steve. Steve, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, and how are you?
Doing good, thank you.
So thank you so much for joining us. Wanted to, say how much we appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk to us. And we're going to kick it off with the same way we do with everyone else. And that's ask you how you first discovered comics.
I probably I probably discovered comics because my parents would have got me some, and every week my father would take me to the local newsstand, and he would be picking up the newspapers, and I would pick up a variety of comics. I started with a fairly decent variety. I remember an early Walt Disney's Comics and Stories, an early Superman annual. Those 80-page giants were amazing. But I quickly gravitated towards the Marvel books, and probably by the mid 60s, I was buying all Marvel, and then by the late 60s, I was trying to buy all of the Marvels. And and then interestingly enough, I came back a bit towards DC when I discovered Kirby's Fourth World and Neil Adams' Batman.
Well, those are two good comics to get into DC for. That's for sure.
Or actually, perhaps more to the truth, Denny O'Neil and Frank Robbins' Batman, because when they started to go back toward the original uh, Dark Knight of the early 40s, I found myself more compelled by that than I had by the cute Batman.
It's understood. Yeah, the cutesy style was a little bit goofball, but
On TV, I was a Green Hornet guy more than I was a Batman guy.
fair enough. So, how at what point in your life, in your professional career, did you decide, okay, I want to make Marvel part of my job?
Well, I was always curious about working in comics, but I there really wasn't anything that was a training ground for comic books back then. And so I got a journalism degree, and I was working public relations for the American Red Cross in Huntington, West Virginia, at a blood center. And several of us also put on a small free science fiction convention. And one of the guests we had there was Joe Duffy. And I think Joe was doing Star Wars at the time. But then the direct sales manager, Carol Kalish, came to the show as well and said that they were looking for a person to do direct market publicity. And so I decided to apply. I got myself to New York to interview, and I joined the publicity team focused specifically on the direct sales side. So my entree into comics professional was through PR and through my journalism degree more than it was through anything else.
Now, did you have any aspirations of wanting to write comics proper, or just wanted to be in that business?
Um, I wanted to be in the business. It was at times a little bit of a be careful what you wish for, but I didn't really see myself as a writer or an artist. I think if I would love to have had a certain skill, I would have loved to have been an illustrator at least as much as the writer, which is ironic since I then moved towards editorial for prose and focused my world almost entirely on the written word. But I really didn't aspire to become a writer or an artist. I got to do a little bit, but that was plenty for me. I was happy just being a part of the comic book community.
So with direct market, what was the information you were trying to get out to out there for people to know? Was it for the fans, or was it for retailers to find out more about direct market?
And it would be both,
Okay.
because I would do press releases that would go to all of the different direct market media outlets.
Mhm.
And then I would also do presentations to direct market retailers, to the distributors. There were, when I started, 15 distributors.
Wow.
And unlike today, where each distributor who's working today is handling a part of the field. So one side does DC, one side does Marvel, somebody else does Image. Back then, each distributor distributed the entirety, and they did it regionally. So you had Cap City in the Midwest, you had uh, Diamond Comics in the Baltimore area, you had Friendly Franks, you had a bunch of different distributors.
Were folks leery of it, or were they just sort of curious about how this is all going to work?
I'm not sure what you mean there, because nobody was leery of the direct market
Mhm.
by the time I came in. By the time I came in, the direct market was pretty firmly established as a major impact.
Mhm.
And I would say that it was around that time that the ID wholesalers, the newsstands, the mom and pop stores, the pharmacies, things like that, were were starting to have their interest flag. Excuse
Mhm.
me.
Oh.
I think the ID wholesalers were having their interest flag in the marketplace. I think in part because the margin, the profit margin on a 25-cent comic book was pretty small. And so they were going to do a lot better with a slick magazine, or to some degree with local newspapers.
Now, who was sort of your mentor at Marvel to sort of help walk you through this and get you up to speed on what was going on with direct market?
Well, in the direct market would have been Carol Kalish.
Okay.
Kalish was the director for direct sales,
Mhm.
working under a fellow named Ed Shukin, who was the overall sales director.
Mhm.
But I was in an odd position that I hadn't realized when I first got there. And that was, you had Carol in the direct sales department,
Mhm.
you had Jim Shooter as the editor in chief, and you had a woman named Nancy Allen, who was the head of publicity. And her publicity was corporate publicity
Mhm.
for Marvel, working under Jim Galton. And the interesting thing was, the three of them did not have the best relationship. And so I found myself a little bit, it could be confusing at times,
Mhm.
because each person would have a different mission. And if the missions didn't combine, then it was very hard to tell exactly what to do. And that kept things, unfortunately, very segmented.
Gotcha. What was your impression in general of Marvel and how it was being run when you got there?
It was a much larger outfit than what I had grown up knowing,
Mhm.
because, of course, when I started reading, the editor was Stan Lee. And there was a succeeding group of editors, or editors in chief,
Mhm.
who were folks like Archie Goodwin, uh, Marv Wolfman, Len Wein, of course, Roy Thomas.
Mhm.
And that it seemed like a smaller, tighter outfit. And when I got there, I think it was kind of surprising at just how many editors there were and how each one would be responsible for a specific group of titles. And it became more so. So you had the X-Men editor or the X-Men editor and two or three secondary editors on X titles. Spider-Man tended to fall under one editor. The Avengers tended to fall under one editor. And so it was effectively divided up,
Mhm.
but at the same time, it was much more complex than I had realized.
I was gonna say, because for fans, we sort of thought of, the bullpen and everyone sitting there working together and just an idea factory going back and forth. But it seems like it was a lot more segmented as groups went as far as the books that they were working on.
Well, now that's an interesting thing because the bullpen
Mhm.
was basically you had the editor offices in a row around the bullpen.
Mhm.
And so the bullpen tended to be the people who did art corrections, paste ups, last minute lettering, coloring. You had a lot of books that would come in that would need a bit of work. You would have a need for sometimes a real rush job because you might have something that was missing and the book had to go to press the next day. And I got to know, as a result, I got to know the manufacturing people too. I got to know the folks in who were downstairs actually sending the materials off to the printers so that we had physical books.
Right.
And so I learned a lot more about the entire process. Uh, and at the same time, the bullpen was fun because there was a lot of camaraderie in the midst of the bullpen. And the bullpen being the center of it all,
Mhm.
around which the editors were positioned, you also tended to have like Halloween parties in the bullpen. You tended to have, um, when you would have a celebrity guest come up to visit,
Mhm.
they would want to see the bullpen because they could see the nuts and bolts, the hands-on work going on.
Right. You're, I think, the perfect person to talk to about promotions because Marvel had Stan Lee, who was never afraid to get in front of a microphone to, exalt Marvel for all that it has and all that, it has to offer. How important do you think it was for them to have a figurehead like that, that everybody knew, who go out there and talk, I'd say, very well with the press and relate to people?
Well, Stan had a superpower.
Mhm.
He had several, but one of the superpowers was that he could talk to you for 20 seconds. His attention would be on you. And if you were getting an autograph and he gave you those 20 seconds, you walked away feeling as if you had just made a new best friend.
Right.
And the interesting thing about that, a lot of people sort of tend to forget this. I think he was rather sincere in his urge to make people enjoy being Marvel fans. Now, he certainly didn't mind people being Stan Lee fans. But the interesting thing was you didn't get the sense that he was selling Stan Lee. You got the sense that he was talking with you one on one in a way that was nicely intimate. And really, he gave you the sense that he respected you, he cared about what you thought, and so you walked away very happy. And Stan could do that. I knew people who practically fell in love with Stan having talked with him for, like I said, 20, 30 seconds. And he had one of the best handshakes in the business, huge hands. But he was actually, there was a warmth to him that I think was a genuine warmth
Mhm.
that a lot of people have forgotten because a lot of what we remember Stan for these days is his later years when he was hampered. by age.
Mhm.
And he went through a lot in his later years.
Mhm.
But I think one of my favorite memories was through my work at Marvel, and over the years, I had gotten to be pretty good friends with Joe Simon. And Joe and his granddaughter went with my wife and me to a Marvel Christmas party. And we're sitting at a table, and I saw Stan talking to somebody in a suit that probably would be more expensive than the average car I might buy. And they were very into it. And I just walked over and I just very briefly said to Stan, Stan, I don't mean to interrupt, but when you have a second, Joe Simon would like to say hello. Stan looked at the guy, went, I'll be back, spun, and went straight over to Joe and was so happy to see him because Joe was the person that Stan credited with a lot of his career.
Mhm.
And seeing those two together was so delightful. But I also imagined the handshake because Joe also had really large hands.
So, in clearly, obviously, in your career and in your comic book collecting, you've been a Marvel guy.
Well,
At-
not exclusively. That's where I came from. But
okay,
I
fair
mean,
enough.
yeah, I mean, like, for example, at the moment, I'm reading, Chaikin.
Oh, nice.
So
Which he'll be happy that you bought that because clearly he's not. He goes crazy with that.
I'm gonna see Howard at the Heroes Convention this summer,
Oh, are
and
you okay?
I'll get him to sign it. But Howard's delightful.
Mhm.
Yeah, we had a chance to talk to him. He was a very fun guy to talk to.
How did
Interesting
you draw
interview.
him? How in the world did you draw him out of his shell?
A friend of
Um, yeah,
He's so shy.
a
you really got to pull the answers out of him. We noticed. You're like, come on, you're not giving it. At any point in your career, did you ever want to see how the distinguished competition did things?
Well, I got to know folks over at DC pretty well. And actually, in many later years, when I left Random House, I did a stint of freelance proofreading over at DC.
Okay.
The woman who had been the head of manufacturing at Marvel was a woman named Allison Gill, one of the nicest people on the face of the earth. And she got me some part-time proofreading work over at DC because she had moved over to become the head of manufacturing at DC. Allison Gill was probably responsible for more of the comic books existing than any other one person.
Very interesting.
I just a quick question on DC. Do you think it hurt them not having a figurehead like Stan to go out in the public? Or do you think having the Foundation, having the Superman, the Batman, the Wonder Womans, that was sort of their figureheads, they could sort of rely on that?
It was two different companies with two different approaches. And Stan was unique. I would have to say that there there was never another Stan.
Mhm.
He just was a unique person.
Mhm.
Having said that, they just were it was a different approach. The advantage Stan had was that he came to prominence. He'd been with Marvel since 1940 when Joe Simon hired him.
Mhm.
But he came to prominence in the 60s with the new, uh, I don't know, relevant characters like Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four. Uh, there were so many characters that the Hulk representing the atomic age, things of that sort. Well, that caught on. The media suddenly decided they wanted to do coverage of what was happening. I think the first big article about Marvel, oddly enough, appeared in the Village Voice. And then that was followed by an article, and I think it was in the New York Herald or Herald Tribune. Don't quote me on that, but it wasn't the Times, but there was an article in the New York paper, in a nationally distributed New York paper, and that article actually quoted the Village Voice piece. And so suddenly people were really noticing comic books.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly you had Spider-Man on the cover of Cream and Wonder Woman on the cover of Ms. And you had these very interesting, you had the wonderful book, All in Color for a Dime by Jules Feiffer, which was actually excerpted in Playboy. And so you had all of these things suddenly in the public eye, and having Stan there was unique because he could literally sit down and create column inches in a newspaper, in a magazine, in a whatever. He could talk to people in a way that brought them in, that made them remember. And I think that was an amazing thing that probably did save comics, because if there hadn't been a Stan, with the demise of the independent distributor, the sudden, absence of comic book spinner racks in newsstands and things like that, then had there not been that intense fandom who became the direct distributors and created stores dedicated to fans, I don't know that we would still have comics. Or we would certainly not have, they would have diminished very fast.
Makes sense. We had an episode that came out last week with Bob Budiansky, Tom Brevoort talking about Marvel trading cards. And I
Right.
understand that you are the gentleman we can thank for these cards becoming the reality. Could you talk a little bit about the process with those cards?
Well, in the direct market publicity department, I was the person who set Marvel displays up at the conventions. And so I would go to San Diego Comic-Con, I would go to Heroes Convention, I would go to Chicago Comic-Con, and I would set up the displays for Marvel. I would bring in editors, I would bring in writers and artists. One of the things that I was concerned about was that we would have the editors go, but I wanted them to have a hook by which they could be talking more intimately with the fans.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted the fans searching for them in a way that they, up to that point, were really looking for the writers and especially the artists. And so I had the thought that if you had a set of trading cards, that the fans would come to the booth for each and every one of the editors in order to talk to them and get their card signed. And it would give the editor an opportunity to have a nice conversation with the person who was essentially their customer, the person for whom they created comics. And so we had the idea that we would have artists with whom we were connected do the illustrations for our trading cards. And we would pay them what was in essence a pittance for a tiny illustration. But it would, that way each editor could get someone who would sort of represent what they did. So I believe Renee Witterstatter had a John Byrne card. I think, I'm trying to remember, Bobby Chase had maybe Dale Keown. You had a variety of people. Bob Budiansky may have drawn his own because he was an artist as well. I'm pretty sure Carl Potts did.
Mm-hmm.
And my first card was illustrated by Sergio Aragonis.
Oh, wow.
And then my second one by Mark Chiarello, who was working in the Marvel art department at that point.
Mhm. So your idea was cards of the people themselves, so that folks can be like, "Oh, that's the guy right there," and have him sign it.
Exactly.
Okay.
But the thing is that each one would have, you know, stats on the back, stats for the editor,
Mhm.
but it would also it would serve as a jumping on point to a nice conversation.
And did it work out well?
I think it did. And it's interesting because they really have just recently started to come back to people's attention.
Most
I
definitely.
have a couple of uncut sets here, uncut sheets that I should probably find.
I was gonna say, because some of these folks, unfortunately, might not be aren't around anymore. So to have that little piece of history of them has to be pretty exciting.
Yeah, yeah. And it was something, I mean, it was interesting. I think that one of the models might have been Eclipse Comics, I think,
Mhm.
did a set of creator trading cards
Mhm.
that included people like Will Eisner and maybe Jack Kirby, folks, prominent people from the comic book field. And there would be some Marvel people in there, like John Romita or John Buscema, but you would have people from across the industry. I think only Marvel ever had a set of trading cards that represented their editorial, marketing, and sales departments. And it also worked nicely for the marketing and sales departments because it gave um, the people in the direct sales department a card they could hand out that wasn't just a business card.
That's like a really cool 8x10 glossy type of thing.
It was designed to be fun.
Yeah.
That is really cool. That's really fun. Now you've had the in doing my research for you, I came across a really unique, special story in that you had the opportunity to be with Joe Simon and sit and watch Captain America, the first Avenger, with him.
Oh yeah.
That's like watching Superman the movie with, you know, Siegel and Schuster.
Yep.
Not even, I mean, thinking, I read that and I had to stop and I was like, holy cow, that's pretty amazing. Because, you could say that a lot of the artists nowadays are able to see their own creations on the screen, but that's pretty current, That's like, what's his name, who created Deadpool, going to see Deadpool.
Right.
But, that's within the past 20, 30 years or so. Not the creator of a golden age character seeing his creation on the big screen in a pretty damn good movie, by the way.
Oh,
What
it's my favorite it's my favorite superhero movie, period.
is it? That's
I
pretty
think it accomplishes more in the course of the film. If you look at Iron Man's a great movie with an okay fight scene at the end.
Mhm.
Same thing with Wonder Woman. Brilliant. And then you get a fight scene.
Mhm.
The battle between Cap and the Red Skull very much echoed everything that was Steve Rogers up to that point. And it was two people who were two sides of the same coin.
Right.
In a way, I would say the other best movie of that sort might be The Dark Knight. I have several Marvel movies that I would probably put before The Dark Knight in my love of the movies. The Dark Knight is a brilliant movie until they decide to throw in a Two-Face storyline that, to my mind, undercuts the whole brilliance of The Dark Knight. Now, admittedly, when Heath Ledger passed away, they were screwed.
Yeah.
So they probably did the best they could. But to my mind, Captain America, the First Avenger is one of the most cohesive pieces of film. And the Captain America arc through the 22 original movies, the Captain America arc is almost perfect. I mean, it begins perfectly. Think Steve Rogers throwing himself on a hand grenade, and it ends perfectly with sort of the ultimate happy ending for Captain America and Sharon Carter, Peggy Carter, excuse me.
Yeah, we were crying in the theater.
What's that?
I have no problem saying, like, I was definitely, tearing up in that movie. Oh my God, he did.
But Joe had gone to see Captain America while we were all in San Diego. And so I was in San Diego at that point for Random House, I believe. Or maybe Titan. I'm now losing track. But Joe went to see a preview in New York. And by this time, Joe is 97 years old. And he was not fond of going out because, as many people, as they get a bit older, they find themselves with a bit of, I guess, maybe agoraphobia. We would go out occasionally, and I'll tell you about one time going to see Al Roker and walking the streets with Joe. That was kind of fun because we could get him out. Joe was desperately in love with my wife, Dana. So my wife could have asked him to do just about anything, and he'd have done it. But I knew that I knew there'd been a lot of stuff going through his head when he's in the middle of this theater. So we talked to Stephen Broussard over at Marvel Films, and he got us a DVD. And so 8 of us threw a little party, popped popcorn, and sat in Joe's apartment to watch the movie.
Wow.
So I'm sitting behind Joe in the dark apartment, and on the screen, scrawny Steve Rogers, grabs the trash can lid to protect himself from the bully. And in front of me, I hear, that was good. And that was one of those moments when I thought, I could probably die happy now. Because that's just incredible. So yes, it was well worth it.
Was he happy with the finished product?
He was very happy with it.
That's great.
He did really like the dancing girls, I will say that.
Oh yeah, well,
there you go.
Joe was a ladies' man. But no, Joe really liked the movie. And I think the beauty of sitting in his own apartment watching it gave him the opportunity to truly take it in and enjoy it as it should be enjoyed.
That's pretty amazing. I still think about that, and I think that's wow. Sorry.
Well, he wouldn't, for example, have got the use of the Howling Commandos. Okay. Because the Howling Commandos would be long after Joe's day. But for the Marvel fan in me, the minute I saw Dum Dum Dugan, I'm like, holy crap.
Yeah, I was the same. I was like, how they were able to so cohesively include all these characters into the story without seeming like they're just shoehorning them in there.
And when Dum Dum dives into the tank and shouts "Wahoo!" which you almost can't hear it over all of the explosions, but we heard it.
Yeah. So you've had you've been in your career at Marvel, you've been a part of, on the inside, working at Marvel during the time of like the golden age of the MCU, which is just an absolute monster. What is that like, first of all? Because I will say the first half versus what we're kind of getting the next phase of the MCU was just, I mean, I will say second to none. I mean, all these 22 movies, 22, each and of themselves, they are their own separate movie, but they tell one big cohesive story. and you're working on these kind of in Marvel, not behind the scenes, but amongst all this stuff that's going on, was the morale just high as a kite as this was going on?
Well, I wasn't at Marvel when the MCU happened.
Okay, my
It
apologies.
is interesting because when I left the direct sales department and became the editor of the behind the scenes magazines, that included Marvel Age, it included special previews. We did a Captain America preview issue that I actually got a John Byrne penciled, Joe Simon inked wraparound cover for.
Oh wow.
We did things like that, and I purposely focused a lot on what was happening in California, which was still very hit and miss. So
Okay.
I still remember calling Avi Arad's office and talking to his assistant, Kevin Feige.
Okay. So that's during
And
like Spider-Man days.
that's before Spider-Man days.
Oh, even before that. Okay.
See, the interesting thing is I left Marvel in, I guess it would have been 90, like January 95, and went to Random House to Del Rey Books to become a science fiction and fantasy editor. But one of the things that Del Rey wanted me to do was to get more licensed properties, because at that point, their only two licensed properties were nonfiction around Star Wars. So things like the Essential Guide to Droids and novels for Robotech. And so their formerly more robust licensed line had just about disappeared. Being a journalist, I knew sort of how to call people and say, hello, I'd like to talk to the right person. So I did that. And one of the things I did was I pursued Marvel properties. And so I was involved with the with Marvel properties, doing things like the novelization for the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, as well as a behind the scenes book written by one of the best guys in the business for that, a guy named Mark Cotta-Vaz. Vaz is fantastic, and he had a similar love of comics as well as movie making. He had done a definitive book on Batman as well, but we did that was so I continued my association with Marvel through licensing,
Got it. Okay.
and that continued after I left Random House and was at Titan Books. And so one of the more recent projects that I got to work on that was really exciting was I worked with an editor named Jesse Holland on Black Panther Tales of Wakanda, which was an anthology of short stories entirely by writers from the African diaspora.
Wow.
That's pretty cool.
So I've been able to continue a degree of professional involvement all the way through, but I've also been able to continue as a fan. So I still go to conventions as a fan. I think one of the best conventions in the United States for comic book people is the Heroes Convention down in Charlotte. If you've never been there and you're a comic book fan, you're missing out. Similarly, the Baltimore Comic Con, but I haven't missed a San Diego Comic Con since 1984.
Wow.
Oh wow. Jesus. Okay. You win.
I want to ask you because you mentioned it before, but where did your love of science fiction come from?
I took a science fiction class in high school. I think I had always loved science fiction in various media, but somebody on Facebook recently posted, what was the book that you could that launched your love of science fiction? And I read the Science Fiction Hall of Fame, edited by Bob Silverberg.
Mhm.
And it had Asimov, and it had Heinlein, and it had Daniel Keyes, and it had so many of the greatest science fiction authors pre 1970s.
Mhm.
And it was exceptional stuff. If you've never read The 9 Billion Names of God by Arthur C. Clarke, you've missed possibly the 5 most impactful pages of prose in existence. The 9 Billion Names of God is incredible, and it's easy to find, so I recommend it.
What's your thought on the state of science fiction as it is today?
It's are you talking about prose, or are you talking about media, or both?
Prose.
Prose. Science fiction is undergoing what is somewhat a golden age with a lot of growth pain, because what's happened is that there are a lot of people from various ethnicities and various genders who are coming into science fiction and lending new and vibrant voices. But as a result, there's been a strong focus on those, and people who aren't of those ethnicities are also having to find their own voices. And it's interesting, it's problematic. My thing is that as an editor, if I'm going to buy a book, I'm either going to buy it as a full manuscript, or I'm going to buy it as a concept. But with the concept, I don't know what the end result is going to look like.
Mhm.
And that can be very problematic. And so, as often as not, depending upon the nature of the protagonist, I'll end up looking for an author who I feel is going to have the most intuitive sense of the characters, which is why we did an aliens novel called Vasquez that was written by Violet Castro, and Violet is the first Latino person to ever put a real stamp on that character.
Right.
The character of Vasquez in the movie is played by a Jewish woman named Jeanette Goldstein,
Mhm.
I think it is. And of course, there's, James Cameron, who is as white as I am. And so for the first time, we were able to give Castro an actual Latino biography. And I think I think in particular what Violet did with the development of Vasquez herself is incredible. And then recently I had a fellow named T.R. Napper do an alien book featuring the character Bishop.
Oh, yes.
And I chose Tim because all of his original science fiction gets into the concept of an artificial intelligence and what is it to be human or not. And so uh, I chose him specifically for his ability to inherently speak to that aspect of the concept of the character.
Could you see a career where you just focused on what you're doing now with science fiction, or did you have to do, or all the steps that you've gone through in your career that had to lead to this?
If I were to tell someone how to get a career in any given area, I would say that the thing to do is to be there, be involved. So I got a job at Marvel by being involved with a convention that had comic book related concepts. But this was after I got a degree in journalism and worked for the American Red Cross. Having said that, I'm 3 degrees of separation from the Mothman, which I'll clarify later. But I'm actually 3 degrees of separation from the legendary Mothman. And that's through the Red Cross.
Okay.
But
Wait a
having
second
said
here.
that, by being at that convention, I was able to talk to somebody at Marvel. I had been interviewing at Random House for a different job and had kept freelancing and working with them and got a job at Del Rey Books. Over the years, I had had a relationship with the folks at Titan Books. And so when the time came, I was able to move over to Titan. Had I not been there, then none of it would have happened. And that's why I go to San Diego Comic-Con, Heroes Con, Dragon Con, World Fantasy Convention, because I want to maintain those relationships. So right now, I've decided to leave anything like corporate employment. I'm of an age where I actually have the freedom to become younger and more flexible because I'm going to work with writers on concept development, career development, and actual freelance line editing. I have an author who gave me a title, which I'm adhering to. A woman named Dana Fredsty had done a series about a zombie hunter. And then she later did a series about a stunt person who worked in Hollywood, where all of the best jobs go to the supernaturals.
I like that.
So in the Spawn of Lilith world, if you want to be a stunt person, it's good to be invulnerable. If you want to be a romantic lead, it's not a bad idea to be a succubus.
Mhm.
And if you walk into an agent's office and smell sulfur, you know why. But when Dana saw the amount of blood I tended to put on the page, because I am obnoxious, she named me her DEO. And so I am the Dark Editorial Overlord.
There you go.
That's quite
And,
the title.
Put
and
that.
that's
Put
the
that on a
name of my
business card.
company, DEO Editorial.
That's awesome.
You put that on a
But
business card.
yeah, but having said that, I'm really excited because I'm working with Jesse Holland, who did the Black Panther series, on a new anthology that is going to pull in stories, fantasy and horror stories based upon actual incidents in African American history.
Oh,
And the idea here, though, is to have them all written by, again, authors from the African diaspora. And Jesse himself comes to it from having been an AP reporter and having done a book on the Black men who built the Capitol and the untold tale of slaves in the White House. So Jesse can do fiction, but he also has the chops for the background. Well, that kind of project development is what I love. I love working with people like Jesse. So that's an example of where I could see the beauty of being, retired is that I get to do whatever I want to and have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah.
you have to explain the Mothman.
Okay. So one of the sightings of the Mothman was a Red Cross panel truck. And a Red Cross panel truck was a van that would move blood either from a blood collection site to the blood center or from the blood center to a hospital. And they were driving at night and they had an encounter with the Mothman. And it was apparently pacing the truck, and a car up ahead turned the corner, the lights sprang up, the Mothman flew away. So I went to the head of nursing at Red Cross to ask B if these people really had that happen to them. And all B would say to me is these were not the kind of people who would make that up. So it goes from Mothman to the panel truck to B to me.
Wow.
And so you guys are now 4 steps removed from the Mothman.
I don't know how to follow up with that.
Well,
So I listen to a lot of other shows, a lot of podcasts that, discuss cryptids and, all these various phenomenon, sightings and things. And one of which they just did like a deep dive on the Mothman. And I was pretty fascinated. So when you brought it up, I was like, where is this going?
well,
That's
I'm
really
not
cool,
making,
though.
I have no firsthand experience to claim anything about the Mothman. But if based on what I just described, you guys are closer to the Mothman than you've ever been before.
That's pretty cool.
Who know waking up this morning?
I know
Well,
Mothman was used as like the basis for that Jeepers Creepers character
Yeah.
because there are a lot of similarities in like, what they say Mothman looks like versus what was used in the movies and things like that. So that's
well,
really cool.
also to me, one reason the Mothman was fascinating. And actually, while I was in college, I worked for the U.S. Soil Conservation Service, and the fellow that I worked for had come from Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and he talked about how the Mothman, people who had encountered the Mothman, their lives had been just like ruined.
Really?
So, but the interesting thing, if you remember, some of the best comics ever done were Steve Gerber's Man-Thing comics.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Man-Thing, I think the Man-Thing was based in the Florida Everglades near a place called Citrusville, as I recall, which was a focal point for weirdness. And hence you had a portal open that spat out a duck. But
It's Florida.
the interesting thing is, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, you had the site was cursed by an Indian chief. The site was where the Silver Bridge collapsed, and I think several dozen people were killed plunging into the Ohio River at rush hour. You went down there, and there was a military depot of some sort with Quonset huts that were sort of covered in grass and such. And here's an interesting one. Carl Potts, an editor at Marvel, said that he once went down there, and he has extremely sensitive ears, and he went into one of those huts, and suddenly the pressure drop was like bam, and he was in extreme pain. There was, and the best one, I think, was a friend of mine named Rex, whose father was an air traffic controller. And Point Pleasant is known for having had times when there were a lot of UFOs going over. And at one point, there were UFOs going over every day at 5. And Rex and his dad were sitting in their backyard south of Point Pleasant in Huntington. And they said, well, if that's the case and it's going north to south, it should be going over. And there it went, right overhead. And the air traffic controller dad couldn't identify it.
Yeah.
So again, if the Man-Thing had suddenly manifested out of the Ohio River, nobody would have been surprised.
That's awesome.
Not the usual stuff that you get on a comic book podcast, I don't think.
Hey.
No, but it's all staying in. It's
Yes.
all staying.
To which I apologize to your listeners.
No, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like, oh, what did you want to do with your career? No, forget it. Come on, talk about
Well, and to be honest, with the weirdness behind all media today,
Mhm.
if somebody were to come to me and say, I want to get a job in publishing, I would first suggest a therapist. And then I would suggest a track coach because runaway.
Yeah.
That's funny. So before we go and how do we follow up with that? So I know you mentioned you have quite a number of things going on, but what can fans kind of look forward to that you have coming out?
At this moment, I don't really have a whole lot. Um, the last Alien novels that I did have been are continuing to be released, and the most recent one, I guess, is one by Brendan Deneen, who's also associated with Scout Comics, as well as Blackstone Publishing. But Brendan did a Morbius novel for me. He did a Guardians of the Galaxy novel, and then he did an Alien novel for me. And so my last Alien books. Oh, actually, probably some of the last stuff that I've been doing was that when I was working on the Conan license, I wanted to do a set of short stories that would sort of replicate what it felt like to be a subscriber to Weird Tales magazine in 1934. And so we're bringing out short stories one a month by people like Stephen Graham Jones and Jonathan Mayberry and Stephen Seville and James Lovegrove. Uh, and these stories are coming out once a month in ebook form because
Okay.
that's the best way to get periodical fiction out these days. Um, Amazon is doing their best to destroy that opportunity, but we're still going to do it, and I think it's going to still work. But the uh, the so those short stories continue to come out at the end of each month, and um, beyond that, a lot of what I'm going to be doing is a lot of programming, probably at Dragon Con, where I do a lot of get-togethers with fans. I do mentor sessions. I do discussions on pacing and clarity. I do discussions on licensed fiction. I try to be on a lot of the different tracks down there. And at Heroes Con, my wife and I actually work in the professional registration,
Okay.
in the professional registration room. And Heroes Con is sort of better expressed in another short story. We were having breakfast one day with Charles Vess. I had just done, I had been working with Charles on the art of Neil Gaiman and Charles Vess's Stardust.
Mhm.
And we were sitting at breakfast, and suddenly I felt a somebody giving me a fairly good and firm shoulder rub. And I thought, well, that's either I'm in trouble or it's Sergio Aragonés. And luckily it was Sergio Aragonés,
Okay,
who
great.
gives really good shoulder rubs. So Heroes Con is more of a family gathering of comic book fans.
Sounds great.
Similar, like I said, to the Baltimore Comic Con, which I think is one of the better shows.
Good.
So I'm back to sort of being a fan.
Yeah.
That's
Love it.
great. Are you going to be becoming a fan after you've kind of seen the business through a different lens, and now I'm sure you have a different appreciation for it?
I do, and I have more personal appreciation for certain kinds of books. And so I really do enjoy, I enjoy getting books by people I know. Um, I've discovered some amazing new artists. Jared Cullum is over at Heroes every year, and Shelton told me to look at his stuff, and his stuff is amazing. He's done the Spider-Man books for Scholastic. No, actually, that's not Jared. Jared has a series of graphic novels, and I'm blanking on what they're called, the guy I'm thinking of who has the Spider-Man novels over at Abrams is Mike Mayhack.
Okay.
And his stuff is just sweet and energetic and fun. And so as much as I absolutely adore the people who got me into it, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, Don Heck, Gene Colan, all of the greats. There's some fabulous people doing stuff today.
And we are back. Yeah, Steve is a phenomenal, phenomenal guy. I love how much he loves science fiction. And I think if you're a science fiction fan, he's a very familiar name for you all. But, you know, talking to him about his work with Marvel, the experiences he had, the things he saw that he was a part of. I love when he was talking about the trading cards for the people who worked there, for the artists and editors to give out so folks knew who they were. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. Steve has so many wonderful ideas, and it was just an absolute pleasure speaking to him. So, Steve, thank you so much for coming on. Like we said, for everyone, we'd love to have you back to talk some more about it, because I'm sure there's plenty of other stories we didn't get a chance to get into this time. But I want to thank everyone for listening. Thank everyone for watching. Have a wonderful weekend. If you're going to Ithacon, I hope you are going to Ithacon. Ithaca College, there's still tickets available, ithacon.org. I will see you there Saturday. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone.